Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to the Hoon, where co-host Peter Bale and I go around the week's news in geopolitics and Aotearoa's political economy with a whole bunch of experts, academics and politicians, all to understand our worlds better and have some fun. Tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome into the Hoon. I'm Bernard Hickey, co-host in my bedroom on Waiheke. Peter Bale, co-host in Hoon Bay. How are you?
I'm good, Bernard. How about you? We still need to go and convert that sleep out of yours outside, I think, into the Hoonadrome.
The Hoonadrome, yeah. We'd have to give it some sort of special roof and maybe an archway of some sort and some red carpet for me.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, but I think we need to do that. Do you want me to start saving my egg cartons so that we can attach them to the wall? I'm sure Mrs. Hickey would love that.
Oh boy, you're in trouble now.
Again.
Rule number one. Never describe Lynn as Mrs. Hickey.
And Bernard, have you been for a swim today? I mean, is it getting? I noticed
only
the
one
weather today. Oh, you did go for a swim though.
Yep.
Oh,
it was gorgeous, amazing. It makes me feel like a human every day, and I'd feel really bad now if I missed out on it. So, very lucky. I hope you're all bruise free and relaxed after your big cycle trip week before last.
Yes. No, I'm not, and I'm trying to maintain it. I did another 50 or 60 kilometers riding this week so far, and I'm going overseas tomorrow, Bernard. I'm going to Sydney for the first time in about 10 years, I think it must be, because I lived there in the late 80s, which again makes me sound even older than I actually am. But so I'm going to be going to Bill's, I think, on Monday. Bill's in Darlinghurst, which everybody will know, and Sean's Panorama in Bondi, I hope, on Sunday night for a little.
There we go. We've just lost our young poor audience.
Yes, exactly.
I can't.
It doesn't look as though I can swim in icebergs because the storm a couple of weeks ago seems to have damaged icebergs. But I'm very much hoping that I might be able to. Yeah. Yeah,
well, that'll be fun. I've always maintained that Sydney is the best city in the world. Spectacularly, placed and energy wise. I still think that every time I go, it's a fun time.
Yeah.
It's been a while, but good luck. I hope it all goes well.
I'm just going for a few days. Yeah, it'll be interesting to I haven't been there for years. It's all nostalgia with me, but it'll be like when I went to Melbourne towards the end of last year. That I'll be shocked that they've let people build buildings and demolish the monorail.
Demolish everything. More housing. Housing. Peter, I hope you managed to get a chance to disconnect from the news because the news for the last week or so has been extraordinary. And I recommend to all of our listeners that they avoid wherever possible looking at their KiwiSaver balances.
I lost quite a lot of money from my pension fund this week and then seem to have regained it today, because when Donald Trump tweeted on Truth Social today is a great time to buy, I bought like everybody else and no doubt like him and his family. I mean, it's just, Bernard, I felt like the kid from The Exorcist. My little head was spinning when I think I messaged you more or less at the moment that I woke up this morning, more or less, oh my God, he's completely lost it this time. It is insane, Bernard. The switcheroo is insane. We'll talk about it a little bit later in some depth with Robert Patman, who we're turning into both an economist and economics historian, a war historian, and so on. But the switcheroo is matched only by the ludicrousness of the switcheroo, what we used to call, in fact, I sent a message, of course you won't see it, but to Bill Ackman, the hedge fund manager who has crawled so far up Donald Trump's bottom that you can barely see his feet poking out, until he described the tariffs as nuclear winter. And today, of course, he's hailing him as a master of negotiations and said this is a maneuver straight out of the art of the deal. So I tried to explain in my note back to Ackman that this is what we call in journalism a reverse ferret.
Yeah, no, that's a very appropriate phrase. And Ackman crediting Trump with some sort of crazy like a fox skill.
It's just, yeah, and also seeing Scott Bessent, the Commerce Secretary, the Treasury Secretary, just talking absolute bellocchio
Tosh.
today
Mm.
about, yeah, the president and I discussed this on Sunday, and this was always the plan. This was
Well, that's not
always
what
the
you
plan.
said to the markets and everyone else on Sunday afternoon.
Exactly. So they have zero credibility. Zero. I
Yeah,
mean,
and this is the
imagine when
problem.
the Treasury Secretary no longer has credibility.
Well, what's interesting about the last couple of days is that the credibility of the United States as the backer of the world's reserve currency was put into question, and you could argue in some of the most dangerous ways we've ever seen. For those who like to try to understand what's going on in the global financial system, the one thing to know is that everyone with lots of money believes in their bones that the US Treasury, the government, US government, will
Always honor.
always honor the US Treasury bond. And it's a multi-trillion dollar, very liquid market, analyzed to the nth degree, the cheapest things to trade. It's where you put your money when you're feeling really nervous. It's where you put your money when you think, I want to make sure I get my money back in 10 years' time. And that I believe that because the United States is the world's longest running, most powerful democracy with great institutions and at least five nuclear powered and armed
And has
aircraft
never
carrier groups.
defaulted. And
Never
has never
defaulted,
defaulted on its treasury debts. Yeah.
except except in recent weeks, we've had open musings from
Yes.
the US president and all sorts about
Maybe we just stop paying. Maybe we just, yeah, I don't know.
paying
People say we
Bitcoin
should.
or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just, and this is playing with fire. In fact, this was one of the descriptions by a well-known Treasury market commentator, Ed Yardeni. He said that Trump was playing with nitro, and he was playing with nitro in the world's largest financial markets. And you could argue that the complete reverse ferret backflip, whatever you want to call it, although remember, he hasn't backflipped on China. And remember,
Well, I think we'll
125.
say he's doubled down on China, but let's just get to China in a minute.
Yeah,
Keep going.
yeah. So
Start
the back.
the week with a soliloquy, Bernard. Why don't you?
Yeah. So what Trump has done is essentially caved in to the bond market vigilantes. So the key moments in the last couple of days were the explosion in the US 10-year and US 30-year yields. From at one point, the US 10-year was 4%, 4.0%. Within about 24 hours, it went to over 4.5%. Now, for those people who don't know the Treasury market, that is an extraordinary move. There was discussion about whether the world's largest hedge funds, who have been using the Treasuries market to leverage up something they call the basis point trade, won't go into the archaic details of it, but essentially it means very big hedge fund managers were leveraging themselves up to the hilt. And remember, these are not banks, so they're not effectively guaranteed by the US Treasury. These are essentially shadow banks. And if they go bust, it's going to be pretty hard for the US government to bail them out, to the point where in the last 24 hours, many serious people were saying it's time for the Fed to start cutting interest rates in an emergency fashion and bailing us out all over again. And so
hence Ackman getting sweaty handed.
Yeah. So that nitro was at the millisecond point before it blows up, and Trump had to jump in.
Why don't we, when bond yields go up, prices go down, right? So the interest rate went up, which it shouldn't have been done necessarily because it was operating inverse to the market. Is that to the equities market? Is that right?
That's right. So typically, what happens is when there's some sort of happy time in the financial markets, what people typically do is they buy stocks because stocks are riskier, and if they have some spare cash, they'll use it to buy the stocks. And if they're feeling really lucky, they will sell some bonds and buy some stocks. When you see people sell both stocks and bonds at the same time, so the prices of both fall, and as you say, when the price of a bond falls, the yield goes up. That's how fixed interest securities work. So it's quite counterintuitive. It's why you'll read in every Financial Times and Bloomberg story a little bit of key background, usually in the second or third paragraph, prices move in inverse directions to yields. And what it means is that when both are moving down at the same time, that is essentially people pulling money out of stocks and bonds at the same time and putting it into cash or buying gold or whatever it is they do. And that is a sign of panic and also a loss of confidence in the world's reserve currency. And when you play with fire like that, and you're that close to igniting the nitro, you're in real trouble. And I think that's what happened. Basically, some of the hedge fund people, and that will include Ackman actually. So no doubt Trump did actually listen to Ackman. Have seen this and gone, we better do something here. Now I don't want to lose face, so I'm going to still whack the Chinese. But everyone else, 90 days.
Bernard.
And
is it your opinion? Because I think I said this to you. Weirdly, you and I were discussing this last night in various messages and your weird lifetime, the way you live your life these days. And we were having the same conversation, or a similar conversation about treasuries in China. And of course, China is the second largest holder of treasuries in the world. Have you seen any evidence in your work that you do for other podcasts that the Chinese did something with their treasuries to dump a few just to warn people?
No. It's very hard to tell because, there are multiple pathways and they usually involve some Cayman Islands or Jersey entity, and the Chinese are very good at making their stuff opaque. So it is hard to tell. But it looks like the real action was driven by the hedge funds closing their dangerously leveraged positions in the basis point market. And also, it was interesting, though, that the Chinese allowed their currency to fall versus the US dollar. And that's one of the fears that people have, that this will escalate to the point where the Chinese government allows the yuan or renminbi to fall substantially against the US dollar. Then the US can actively accuse the Chinese of manipulating their currency.
Yeah.
And if it turns into a rout, China then has to basically shut down capital flows, because one of the really big fears for China and for anyone in and around the Chinese economy is that if China was somehow to lose control of its capital flows, particularly the capital flows out of China into the rest of the world, that is financial Armageddon for China and probably some sort of social and political catastrophe as well. So they're going to have to be very careful about how they tiptoe back from this one.
I mean, this weird thing today of just flicking it completely to it's all about China was always about China. China was the one whose attention we wanted to get. We wanted to attack China because they retaliated and showed disrespect to world trade, to world markets.
It's like South Park. Respect my authority. I mean, give me a break. This is the president of the... Anyway, it's just...
So are we doing a soliloquy at the end of the show as well, Bill?
Oh, we can do that. We'll come back to this.
I'll just quickly slip in here. I looked up the WTO again today, and they find I made a mistake also last week, I think it was. I said that Pascal Lamy was the Director General of the WTO, but it's not Pascal Lamy. But they finally issued he was the previous one. This is the Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who's the Director General, finally issued a statement on the 9th of April yesterday to say that they're concerned about the escalating trade tensions between the United States and China. But I guarantee she hasn't had a conversation yet with Donald Trump.
Yeah. They've discarded the whole thing. And basically, they are turning the United States into 1927, the United States. Isolated.
What happened in 1929, Bernard?
Yeah. In fact, actually, that even after these reversals or this pause this morning, the United States will have an average tariff rate significantly higher than it was at the time of Smoot-Hawley. And this is the thing that the markets have sort of lost sight of, and everyone because of the initial enthusiasm after the 90 days of pause, yay! Well, actually, the world's two largest economies, the biggest trade flow on the planet across the Pacific, it still has 125% tariff on exports from China to the United States and 84% tariffs on exports from the United States to China. So what you will have is components that are made in the
Oh,
United States being
every
exported, tariffed at the border of China, being put together with other bits and pieces, exported back to the United States, tariffed again at 125%. So something that was costing you $1 is now going to cost you like $2.90, which means that
in
trade
yep,
stops. It's
and in
just
Walmart, imagine what it's going to be like for Walmart, America's biggest retailer, biggest employer, I believe, is Walmart. It's built its entire business on inexpensive Chinese goods. Now, look, we better talk about what we're going to do. Oh, there's Mississippi. We better talk about what we're going to do today. We've got Catherine Dyer coming up to discuss climate. We've got Professor Robert Patman back from Otago University this week. People missed him last week, but I'm sure you had fun with Elaine Monahan as well. And we have the chairman of the Health Coalition Aotearoa, Boyd Swinburne, on to talk about a really interesting initiative about transparency in elections on things that you've talked about quite a lot, Bernard, about declaration of lobbyists, transparency on costs, all that sort of thing. And then we've got the social cohesion survey, Bernard. Do you want to just mention what that is first?
Yeah, so there was a big survey put out earlier this week by the Helen Clark Foundation in concert with Shamubeel Jacob and Rosie Collins. This was for the first time asking questions of New Zealanders with their Talbot Mills surveying techniques, asking them how close and how connected they felt to each other and to Aotearoa. And what it found is that we are less cohesive, for example, than Australia. We are much less cohesive than we think. That young people who are new migrants, Māori, do not feel as connected to the country or each other as many others do. We are not quite a divided nation in the way that the United States is, but we are not together. And this is a problem because when you're not together, and someone says we all need to pull together for this thing, and everyone goes, well, why should I? Because you haven't helped me out before, and I don't feel part of this team. Why should
Yeah.
I pull? But
Well,
why
Bernard,
should I do everything
I'll also
together?
be interested when we get, because you've read it and I haven't, but I am always interested also in the correlation, which is outstanding often between loss of trust in media and loss of trust in politicians. So shall we move to the show and to poor old Catherine, who's been sitting there waiting, listening to us talk bollocks?
Thank you.
Top quality bollocks, of course.
Top boys, that's right.
Top quality.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Catherine. Great to see you there on the Hoon. It's
You
been,
too.
I mean, it's a huge week for global trade and what's happening. There'll be a few degrowthers out there going, you know what, this is just quietly, it's quite good. But what did you think of? Firstly, we had the big report out from Simon Upton, the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, yesterday, recommending the government pull forestry out of the emissions trading scheme. This is in tune with what the Climate Commission has said. But what did you think of the broad argument?
Yeah, Simon Upton sort of has a long history of talking about forestry in the same way. He doesn't see it as a good permanent carbon storage way to go about things. So this is pretty consistent with things that he said in the past. And yeah, he's got some really good points. He gives some good advice, and that report has a lot of depth in it in terms of looking at all of the possible ways that you can go forward in terms of how you treat forestry and how you treat land use, and what kind of vision do we want to have for our land use in the future. So yeah, he's got a lot of really good points. I think also there are some other issues in the ETS approaching. We have a system with the Climate Change Commission and with the way that we set our policies to look at carbon budgets and we have a decreasing carbon budget over time. And that kind of brings up some issues that are coming along quite quickly in the future in terms of how many, whether we have enough carbon budget left to keep issuing certificates.
Yes.
So
And that's where, for example, there's so many industries and companies who currently get a whole bunch of credits for free to so-called keep them in the country.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of stockpiling as well of carbon credits that companies are kind of hedging in case the price goes up really high in the future. So there's quite a few that have been sat on as well in the background. So there are a lot of issues in the not too distant future for the emissions trading scheme in quite general terms. But yeah, definitely forestry. I mean, because the other thing with forestry, of course, is all of these pine plantations, they have all sorts of other issues associated with them in terms of biodiversity loss, in terms of the slash that comes down whenever there are storms, which we're expecting to have more of. The wildling the wildling trees are becoming a massive issue, as a pest. Across great swathes of the country, you've got these wildlings popping up all over the place. So there's a whole lot of other non-climate related issues with doing that as well. So yeah, I think he usually gives pretty good advice to Parliament, and this is another report where he's giving good advice.
Unfortunately, Simon Watts, the climate change minister, has said not much is going to change here. It's an interesting problem for the government. They obviously have a bunch of iwi, foresters, and some farmers who like the idea that they can, do something economically useful and lucrative with previously not very profitable and scrubby land, so to speak. However, there's also a tension within rural communities and a lot of people within the normally national voting base in provincial New Zealand who don't like these forests being whacked up and all the kids being pushed out and the schools closing down and no one there except for a few trees. And I often wonder whether this is one of those examples where the environmentally conscious, pro climate action parts of politics, I suppose you'd call the green side, who are very keen on native forests, but not necessarily radiata pine, whether they could get together with the more conservative blue tinged voters on the other side who also want to get rid of the forests, the pine forests, and whether there's a deal to be done there. But National are not are taking that opportunity. And unfortunately, New Zealand is the only place in the world, as I understand it, that has Pinus radiata in its emissions trading scheme. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, actually. I'm not sure if it's... I imagine there are other places where pine plays a role in their efforts to achieve...
Chile must, yeah. I'll have a look.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of Finland as well. But, Finland in particular, last year, they had a situation where all of their forestry did not actually provide a net carbon sink. It provided net carbon emissions because of, changes in climate. So, that's another thing potentially to look at in the future as to whether it actually provides the sink that we think it's going to provide, and what happens if it stops providing that sink. So, I mean, quite apart from things like fires and pests and all these sort of things that can eradicate your forest altogether, they can't just stop absorbing carbon in the way that they have done previously as a land sink. So.
That's one of the worries. Just to sort of update my off the top of my head comment, there is one other country that allows pine forests to be included as an offset in the emissions trading scheme, and that is Kazakhstan. Catherine, there's been some, Kazakhstan.
Well found,
I think,
Bernard.
Yeah. Catherine, some interesting research out of Auckland University this week on the emissions impact of electric vehicles, because we all love them, electric vehicles. It's good for the environment, but is it really?
I really like being able to talk about New Zealand research as well when it comes to this sort of thing, stuff from Aotearoa. So, and this is out of the Energy Centre at Auckland University, which I did a summer school in energy economics through that through them a few years ago, which is actually open to the public if anybody's interested in that. But they showcase a lot of their own research at that in that training. So yeah, so they've actually come out with some research showing that electric vehicles have contributed net emissions globally rather than reducing net carbon dioxide emissions globally, which is quite an interesting result. And it's such a multi-layered issue, so it's going to be like hard to stay on track time-wise and talk about this issue. I mean, I think one of the two major reasons why there are higher emissions associated with electric vehicles is because when you manufacture them, they require a lot of material resources and a lot of things being moved around and a lot of extraction and so on, and that all has emissions associated with it. They are higher in CO2 emissions to manufacture and ship an electric vehicle versus an internal combustion engine vehicle. And then when you put them on the road, how quickly they offset those emissions depends on what kind of electricity grid you have. And so if you're driving one of those in a place where you have a coal-fired grid, then you're not really reducing your emissions that much compared to an internal combustion engine. So there's a bunch of different ways you can look at that. The most narrow way, I guess, of looking, or the most narrow way is saying there's more emissions from them, full stop. But if you broaden that out a little bit, you could say that we all have to get to zero emissions at some point. There are different sectors that are transitioning at different rates. So you've got the electrical grid transitioning, you've also got transport transitioning. You can't do these serially. It would take far too long. You've got to do them in parallel, and sometimes the different speeds at which things are happening are going to cause these sort of issues where maybe the net emissions aren't where you think they're going to be, but you still need to be on the path. So that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it would be to say, this applies to a lot of technologies where they become cheaper over time and the uptake increases. But when you look at why they're cheaper, it's often because the costs are being borne somewhere else, and because of the extraction associated with electric vehicles, you are getting all sorts of environmental impacts in other places, and you're also getting impacts on people where their labour isn't being fairly paid for. You've got so you have all of this extraction going on, and so that technology looks affordable, but only because somebody else is paying part of the price for it. And actually, if you were paying the full price, it would still be more expensive.
Let alone the health implications, Catherine, presumably.
Yes, for people who are involved in mining, for instance, and
well,
things
no,
like that,
I was meaning let alone the health implications for
reduced emissions.
Reduced emissions, yeah.
Yeah,
and ultimately, we should all do what Peter did a couple of weeks ago, which is cycle around everywhere.
Yeah, not on an e-bike. Although, all right, Catherine, since you're there,
yeah. So that's the other thing. If you're making a choice between buying a new vehicle, it might be better to buy an EV versus an internal combustion engine. But you really should be questioning why you're buying a vehicle at all when there are so many better options. Well, not for everybody, but there are better options for some. But also thinking more broadly about how we design our cities. We've made them so car-centric that it's impossible for a lot of people to do without a car. But if we had designed the way we live and how we live so that people can get the places they need to go on a daily basis within walking distance of where they live, you would have much happier, healthier populations.
Bring on Waymo, and we can all just take taxis. And also, I only drive vintage and classic cars, so there's
a Renault
my
4 electric for
Bentley
you,
is
Peter.
Yeah, I know there is. It's just not being
it's a good one too.
Right, we better bring in.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Lovely to see you.
Patman. Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks.
Professor Patman from Otago. It's great to see you.
Good to see you. How are you?
Good. We've decided to expand your realm to economic history, being an economic historian, to being a military historian, and also an historian of the Second World War. Because one of the things when I heard Trump doing this thing today about sanctions on China and how mad it was, I was reminded of this enormous book that I've just finished, which I think I mentioned before, called Tokyo, Judgment in Tokyo, which was about the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal, because I hadn't fully understood until I read that recently the extent of the trade embargoes that the United States imposed on Japan to prevent its growth in the 1930s and in the 1930s before the war. This is a fairly dark precedent, isn't it? To essentially say I've played a blinder. We'll get into the flip in a minute. Where I've played a blinder and China's fallen into my web.
But has it?
Yeah. Well, excuse me. I asked the questions here. You're the professor. You answer.
I think Mr. Trump has just blinked. Yes, at the moment, and I would help. Bernard can help me out here, because my understanding is that, of course, the administration is depicting this as all part of the master plan by Mr. Trump to reward those who haven't retaliated against the administration. My understanding is what really got the Trump people really alarmed in the last 24 hours or so has been movement in the bond market, which may have been initiated by China. And it would be great, Bernard, if you could shed any light on that, because I understand it in the abstract, but that's about all.
Yeah, we had a bit of a chat about this at the beginning, but you're right. It was the bond market that did it. And there's that famous phrase from James Carville. Remember James Carville, the Ragin' Cajun, who said during the 1990 or 1989-90 election of Bill Clinton, that and he was the guy who had this great phrase, "It's the economy, stupid," whenever Clinton was veering off track. He said if he ever died and went to heaven and was able to come back, he would come back as either the Pope or a fantastic baseball player. But if he really wanted to come back and be powerful, he'd come back as the bond market. And there's some truth in that. I think, though, that whether it was China or not, it's pretty hard to tell, because the opaque way in which China trades treasuries is difficult to track. You can do it months later, but in the moment, it's very hard. But certainly the loss of faith by many in the international financial community in the United States as a reliable creditor was as much a factor in that slump as anything else. And there's nothing more frightening for a politician than the potential of mortgage rates going up, particularly in the United States, with a 30-year Treasury yield really exploded. And that's the one that gets people very nervous, because in the United States, it's all about the 30-year Treasury yield. They do their mortgage fixing for 30 years, and they're actually safe for 30 years as long as they don't have to refinance. And that's when it gets ugly for them. Robert,
you didn't just wait a second. He still hasn't addressed my Japan thing here, though. Do you see any parallels, Robert, between the attempts to limit the growth of Japan that occurred with sanctions and so on in the 1930s, and this now full-on trade attack on China? Or is that
somebody's pointed out that there's only 3 occasions in history when the United States has used tariffs on an extensive basis. One was in 1828, one was 1930, and now one is 2025. And the first 2 ended in depressions, economic depressions. I do think 2025 is likely to backfire on the administration, although it may take a bit of a while. I'm just staggered. I mean, there's 2 parts to this. There's no doubt about it. The damage so far to the United States, the stock market, has been, despite a so-called relief rally in the last 12 hours, has been staggering. Somebody pointed out that since Trump's become president, the US stock markets have lost in excess of 11 trillion. And it's going to bite into people.
We're winning. You get sick of the winning.
Well, not for the ordinary citizens. The billionaire class may be making some real killings at the moment, according to speculation in the United States. And there's several, I think there's certainly some senior Democrats who want some look an investigation into inside trading by people associated with the administration,
possibly
or close
including
to it.
Donald Trump.
Yeah. But I think the parallel between the 30s and 2025, I think we have to treat it with caution because of the very, very different structure of the international system. Also, the speed in which things happen now because of technology, not in any way to minimize the terrible impact in the past of the depressions that occurred, but I do think I would hesitate to draw lessons from the 1930s to now, simply because of the different international system.
Okay, let me keep you in the 1930s then, Robert. What about the failure of the League of Nations and the potential failure of the United Nations? To bring this very quickly into your bailiwick, Trump has threatened Iran very, very vigorously. I don't recall that going through the United Nations Security Council in any way. I haven't seen anything from Guterres on this. And yet we're talking about supposedly direct, but they're actually going to be indirect conversations on Saturday. Is there not a risk here of, especially when you think about the meeting with Netanyahu this week, a really, an attack on Iran would be a fabulous distraction from all of this, wouldn't it?
It could be. And, let's be quite clear, the Trump administration really works through the UN Security Council. And to be fair, its predecessor didn't always work with the UN Security Council either. And even when it did,
there isn't even a US ambassador to the UN, as you know, yet.
Oh.
Because she was
Well, that
withdrawn
speaks volumes, doesn't it? Let's be quite clear, as we've said in many other discussions, Trump's vision of international relations is not the one that easily gels with that of New Zealand. One of the things I did find interesting, though, is the fact that Mr. Luxon is apparently meeting with leaders in Europe in the not too distant future to discuss the idea of further strengthening the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is has very tough rules for membership. And there's even been speculation that the members of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and of course Japan played a pivotal role in putting that together, the United States opted out of it, and China's not yet a member, may be used as something of a successor to the paralyzed WTO. It's no secret that many countries are frustrated by the impotence of the WTO in the face of what have been a whole series of unilateral, one might say, extortionist tariffs applied by the United States. One thing that I think is really going against the administration has been not just the application of the tariffs, but the incompetent way it's been done. It's all very well talking about the art of the deal, but the deal maker does need to command respect, i.e. have an intellectual grasp of the situation. And New Zealand and a number of other countries have found themselves subject to tariffs on quite bogus charges. For example, weren't we accused of being putting 20% tariffs on the United States or something? This was clearly quite inaccurate. Europe made similar charges. China will not miss this. China's watching the United States very carefully, and I think we may see some dramatic institutional innovations as a result of this situation in the medium to long term. It will be very interesting. I've always thought there were three options here. There was the option that Mr. Trump would quickly win. That is to say that his approach to this problem, imposing tariffs against 185 countries, would cow everyone into running off to the White House and, in Mr. Trump's term, kissing his posterior. That is happening.
He didn't say posterior, though, did he? He said ass. I'm
Well,
sure it was AWS as opposed to ARSE. I'm just going to do a little translation here.
I've got to retain my
ARSE,
dignity.
AWS, yeah. We're anything if not multilingual around here.
He said that in a speech last night, apparently. But the point to note here is a second possibility, which I've also thought really was a return to the status quo with Mr. Trump claiming victory. Some people are seeing the current backtracking this week as a move in that direction. The third option is Mr. Trump's moves to crash and burn and the emergence of a post-American order with other countries saying to the United States, look, you may be the most powerful country in the world, but you're unreliable in security and economic terms. We're going off with the other free traders, because I think the majority view in the international order, and I think Mr. Luxon has hinted at this recently, that New Zealand's not going to take a backward step on its commitment to free trade. And many other countries like Japan and others take that view as well. So it's going to be very interesting. I think I think it was Fareed Zakaria who predicted the rise of the rest in the 21st century. It'd be interesting to see if the rest begin to organize themselves and effectively bypass the United States. And
I think
I
you're
think it's a fear amongst some Americans that America has dealt irreparable damage to itself in terms of its soft power and its international reputation, and that others are not going to sit around knocking at the door and begging, which of course Mr. Trump wants, but whether what he wants and what he gets is two different matters. Mr. Trump is in a very precarious situation at the moment. He has initiated a whole series of actions, but he cannot control the response of others to those actions. China's defiance will be watched by the EU. The EU has showed barely veiled anger about Mr. Trump, and the EU and China are two significant players in the world economy, and I'm not sure if the United States can win if it alienates both of them.
Well, yeah, so just today, as you suggested, Robert, there's been a series of meetings between members of the European Union, leaders of members of the European Union and the CPTPP. And there are suggestions that it could be used as a vehicle to reorder global trade, remembering that if China were to join it, and you're right, China is asked to join, and previously we've suggested, if we let China join, the Americans will be pissed off. And now we're thinking, do we care if the Americans are pissed off how awfully they've treated us? And the Europeans too, they really are in the end about free trade. And they see an opportunity here because the European Union has always presented itself as an alternative power source or power balance to the United States. The euro really is at the core of that project to create an alternative reserve currency. Now, the US dollar has about 60 to 70% of the global reserves. The euro now has about 20%, and the renminbi, which has never really taken off, is under 5%.
Because they were perceived as non-capitalist.
Yeah. Whereas the European Union, sure, they're not exactly a bunch of freewheeling libertarians, but they do have a rules-based system. They are a bunch of democracies, pretty much, and they are at the moment the most sensible and friendly lot in the room, who are also feeling under threat and more likely to pull together than to blow apart. And that's why I think this push towards pulling the CPTPP and China into the orbit with the EU might have some legs this time, simply because the EU is in a much better position to have an alternative financial architecture to what the United States has produced. So I think it's a really interesting point. Although, as you said, Peter, and I'd be curious to know what you think, Robert, can we get through this weekend in the Middle East?
Yeah, well, it's a desperate situation in Gaza. And how long have they been under blockade now? They've had no food going in for at least 3 weeks. And, Mr. Guterres, the UN Secretary General, made it quite clear the situation is horrific. And so,
but Robert, I think can we not agree? Look, we have to wind you down in a moment. Although you did a fantastic segue. Israel did that Netanyahu meeting with Trump this week not confirm that Israel has impunity to do what it likes in Gaza and potentially in some kind of joint great distraction in Iran?
With any other leader, except Mr. Trump, I would say yes. But Mr. Trump can change his mind at the drop of a hat. And It looks that way. It looks like Israel's been. Let's be quite clear. Israel's been acting with impunity since the 8th of October 2023. Every time the Biden administration moaned or expressed concern about high civilian casualties and consulted, Mr. Blinken made one trip after another to Tel Aviv, all to no avail. I mean, Biden, Netanyahu mocked the administration. Yes, he's more enthusiastic about Trump, but will Mr. Trump actually have much effect? It seems like he's quite happy for Netanyahu. He told Netanyahu to finish the job. He says that he's quite clear from the discussions this week that Mr. Trump still views Gaza as something of a real estate scenario, which America can benefit, or at least some of his close associates can benefit, such as his son-in-law, quite well from any outcome. And it seems like he has no problem with a forcible eviction of Palestinians from Gaza. There's no sign that Mr. Trump is troubled in humanitarian terms by that. So I suppose from Mr. Netanyahu's point of view, the administration has given us a sort of green light to both the establishment of Greater Israel in Gaza and also the West Bank. It keeps saying it, but at the end of last year, the Netanyahu government indicated that it wanted to go ahead and annex West Bank. Again, this is related to our previous discussion that Bernard was just reflecting on. I don't think the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the EU will be just discussing tariffs. I think there's a growing sense of concern that the United States is so close to Israel that Europe cannot necessarily safely go along with the consequences of that coziness between Trump and Netanyahu.
Yeah, let's also, just because I can see some feedback going on here. Let's also be clear, of course, what happened on October the 7th. Israel's right to defend itself, but I think your point is very well made
that's
about
true.
the impunity.
That was an appalling terrorist attack on the 7th of October, but it didn't occur in a clear. It didn't come out of a clear blue sky.
Yeah,
and the Palestinians actually have a right to defend themselves under international law, not just the Israelis, and also the occupation. Under international law, Israel has to, as the UN Secretary General pointed out, fulfill its responsibilities as an occupying power, which it is clearly failing to do. And that is a humanitarian disaster for the people. I mean, let's be quite clear. The people of Gaza didn't have any say on the attack on Israel. That's quite clear. And secondly, they have been collectively punished for an action by Hamas that many of them were not responsible for. We're looking at horrific humanitarian consequences. 92% of residential buildings in Gaza have been destroyed, and 70% of the people killed there have not been active members of Hamas. They've been women and children.
Just to be clear, Robert, to head off, you're not arguing that October 7th was justified?
No, not at all. I think Hamas played into Netanyahu's hands. But let's be quite clear. And the question that Mr. Netanyahu has to face is, why did he support the idea of Qatar funding Hamas for so long? In 2019, he described Hamas as a public asset. Why?
Mr.
Netanyahu denies the right of political self-determination to the Palestinians, which, of course, plays into the hands of hardliners within the Palestinian community.
Robert, thank you. Joe Rogan length episode on that, possibly even multiple episodes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you so much, Robert. And I'm going to ask Boyd Swinburne to come in. Boyd, you're the chairman of the Health Coalition of Aotearoa. We've had my friend Dr. David Galla on before. But Boyd, you're doing something interesting this week as an unusual combination of your group, which is predominantly about, I believe, the standards and the quality and the transparency in health in New Zealand, combining with the Helen Clark Foundation, the Ngāpuhi Iwi and Transparency International to launch a project that I thought must have been picked up from Helen listening to the Hoon, actually, because Bernard's been advocating for months this whole transparency of lobbyists and the transparency of political payments. Could you tell us, Boyd, a little bit about what this campaign is? I think there's 6 points, 5 points that I'd love you to reiterate, because I didn't feel they came across as strongly as maybe I was asleep that the other night. But it's, and also why Health Coalition Aotearoa would get behind something like this. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. And thanks for having me on the show. It's not only Bernard that's been going on about this. There's actually lots of reports and things that have come out from the Auditor General. Helen Clark Foundation's put out a couple of reports. We've done a couple of reports. Transparency International has done its perceived corruption index showing New Zealand is sliding. We've had multiple, the electoral, independent electoral report and things. Lots of reports and people who kind of know how the governance systems work saying we're losing trust in our governments, we're losing trust in the processes. Private money is dominating the lobbying, and groups that have, like Health Coalition Aotearoa, that have a health purpose, or groups that have a social purpose or an environmental purpose, just don't get in and are able to carry the same weight. So this is the sort of private and commercial interests outweighing those with the common good. So the reason that Health Coalition is into this is
Thank you.
because our area is around trying to reduce the impact of harmful products on our health. So these harmful products are tobacco, alcohol, and unhealthy food. You join those up, and that is about 1/3 of the preventable health damage in this country every year, and that's a huge amount of loss of life, of premature death, and illnesses, and so on. Why do we not have regulations and taxations and all of the things that WHO and experts reports recommend that we do? And there's a stack of reports this high. Why have they not been implemented over decades? Because they're evidence-backed, they're expert-backed, and they actually have evidence to show they work. The reason is that we have powerful commercial interests preventing it. They'll either jump up and down if anything raises its head, like a sugary drinks tax or restrictions on marketing. But it's this thing called regulatory chill, that politicians won't jump in and take on this humongous alcohol industry or food industry or whatever, because that's a huge battle. Why would they pick that fight? And we see that just happen time and again in New Zealand. So that's the frustration from the Health Coalition's perspective, and that's why we're wanting to get better integrity of public policy making for public good.
So you want an online, publicly accessible and searchable register of anybody involved in lobbying, right? A cooling off period for 1 to 3 years to slow the revolving door between government and lobbying. It was very noticeable that people referred to, but without naming him, Chris Farfoy's move from being immigration minister to being a consultant, a mandatory code of conduct for lobbyists, and the creation of an integrity commission to enforce these provisions. I recall there was also something about political donations, right? The level of political donations that had to be declared. Could you address those?
So the first one around, a few of those things come under the regulation of lobbying. We're unusual in New Zealand. We have no lobbying regulations, which is unusual for OECD countries. So we need laws to be able to cover that. And that would include slowing the revolving door of things like ministers going out, being minister one week and lobbyist the next week. But there's also the better management of commercial conflicts of interest. I mean, I think these fast-track legislation that's gone through has just thrown up the whole issue of conflicts of interest. So consultants and people on boards and advisory groups to the government, those conflicts need to be managed much better. Strengthening the openness and transparency. So the OIA, the Official Information Act, is more than 40 years old. And, it's got good bones, but boy, it needs a tune up. And there's a lot of areas where we can improve that. And the Chief Ombudsman put out a report just about exactly that a few weeks ago. And then the fifth one is tightening the restrictions on political donations. So this is putting in a cap on individual donations, lowering the public disclosure threshold, and probably most importantly, allowing only registered voters to make donations. So this is not corporates, and it's registered voters.
Why shouldn't corporates be able, just but for argument's sake, Boyd, I didn't notice that the other night. Why corporations are part of, we don't want to go as far as the United States, where corporations have the same free speech rights and therefore can donate as much as they like. But they're part of society. Why shouldn't they donate to political parties if it's transparent?
Yes, well, democracy is, by the people, for the people, not by corporations for themselves. So, the very nature of democracy is that people making the decisions, not big entities like corporations. And the problem that we have is this outsized effect that they have on our political policy making. It's not to say that they can't be involved within the normal processes of making policy and putting in submissions to select committees and all that sort of stuff. But it's just there's an oversized influence that they have compared to all of the other voices that need to be at the policy making table.
Boyd, could you give us some insight into how some of these policies that could have gone through, like for example a sugar tax, how that regulatory chill takes effect? I mean, what is the mechanics of it? Does a proposal come up from a government department and then it sits on a minister's desk for 5 years and then nothing happens? What's the way this works?
Yeah, so it's just a chill. It's hard to put your finger on it, but let me give you an example. So in the last government, Chloe Swarbrick put in a bill around alcohol, which had two things in it. One was to sort out the local alcohol policies, because the big players, the supermarkets and the liquor industry, have been delaying through the courts the implementation of these local alcohol policies around closing hours and so on for 10 years. And that loophole was never closed. She put up two things, that plus banning alcohol sponsorship of sports and events and things. It got pulled out of the biscuit tin, and that rather shamed Labor into saying, gosh, we're Labor, we should be doing something about this. They picked up the LAP because that was kind of less contentious, but they totally dropped the sponsorship. That is just too big a battle to deal with the alcohol industry at a political level, and the sports industry and all that stuff, and it's just dropped. It's too big a battle, and I think that we see that time and again.
Boyd, this week it's been reported that Winston Peters will be giving a speech at the 10th anniversary party for Cameron Slater.
Oh, sorry. Excuse me.
Yeah, I mean, as someone myself who has been attacked by that blogger who has been found guilty of defamation, apart from other things, what did you think of that? Winston Peters is
Bernard,
the Deputy Prime Minister.
Could you just explain to people who, like me, who haven't, I do vaguely know who he is, just quickly give like 15 seconds. Who is he?
Cameron Slater is a national and New Zealand First aligned blogger who has defamed various people and been found in court judgments to have lied and been given money by people to attack others in the most awful ways, including, my understanding, yourself, Boyd, and you've been involved in various court hearings and in my
I have.
view, the
I'm
attacks
just going to have
by
to turn my light on. It's starting to flick because it's 6 o'clock.
Because you're not moving enough. Go on, Jesus Christ! You should be having
no,
a walking desk at the university. Yeah.
So Boyd,
Yeah.
what did you think when you opened your paper and there was David Fisher reporting that Winston Peters, the Deputy Prime Minister, is going to go along to a party and say nice things, or at least laud Cameron Slater.
Yes, I haven't got my invite to that little party yet. I'm expecting it in the mail any time. But this was a very sad time in New Zealand politics. The dirty politics that Nicky Hager exposed, and the direct line that he had to the ninth floor of the Beehive with
Who,
with
Nicky
Prime
Hager
Minister's
had,
office.
or Cameron
No.
Slater had?
Cameron Slater had was getting all the feed from the ninth floor to put out his dirty blogs, and he kind of quite loved to hack at people like myself, and there were several others who he attacked and defamed, and we had to go through the High Court and so on to get restoration there. So it was a nasty period, and I don't think we need to resurrect that. And I think it's very sad indeed if he is celebrated in that way by the Deputy Prime
Okay,
Minister.
Boyd, well, I'm going to make a slight suggestion here that you stay on because I have some questions to ask Bernard that I was going to ask Bernard. Bernard, do you have any more questions for Boyd, or can I shift the dial slightly?
Please shift the dial.
Okay, but first of all, if our audience, which they are interested in this transparency aspect, how can they find out more about this campaign that you're proposing?
So we did the launch on Monday, and as I said, it's a joint venture between Helen Clark Foundation, Transparency International, Health Coalition, Aotearoa. We have on our website, we have a place to sign up for people that want to support us in this. We're going to put together mini campaigns over the next 18 months to pull out each of those 5 areas. And we want to get open letters, discussion, debate. This is something that needs to be debated over the next 18 months in the lead up to the campaign, because
and let's
this is
be clear, this
absolutely
is
integral.
about transparency. It's not about political partisanship. Just go to Health Coalition Aotearoa.
Yep,
and you
the
can find the scheme, or through Ngāpuhi, presumably. And I think the Helen Clark Foundation has also pitched it, and Transparency International.
And Transparency, yep. Yeah. So sign up for it, and we'll need your support.
Great. Okay, so let me, because and I'm very happy to do that, because somebody, in fact, David Gallagher said, why don't you get us on to talk about this, and I am interested to do it. So you talked then about a dark period in New Zealand politics, the dirty politics area. I do know Nicky Hager very well, or used to, and I am aware of that. But I was away. There seems to be something going on here, and I'm pitching this to you and Bernard, and please don't defame anybody, because Bernard and I vaguely have some experience in legal dangers, but there seems to be some really nasty shit going down at the moment with the New Zealand First, in a rather undignified way, I would have thought, for the Deputy Prime Minister to be attacking this perhaps unwise Green politician over his social media posts, but also the appearance of huge posters of Chloe Swarbrick and Tamitha Paul about defund the police, which I've noticed both ACT and National are jumping on. And then I've got this funny stuff with Shane. Maybe I'm just watching too much. Shane. What's Shane's last name, Bernard? Shane.
Matua Shane, we call him.
Yeah, Matua Shane, basically saying we're going to get rid of the bloody UN and we're going to get rid of the. It's just where is this shit coming from, and are we entering another dark period? And what's going on here? Is it the local elections, Bernard, that they're all worried about? Are they worried about Greens and Te Pāti Māori? Please go ahead.
Go for it, Boyd. If you have a view.
I think it's just before this, you were talking about what's happening in the US. We're getting trickles of that here, and it's nasty, and it's horrible, and it's destabilizing, and it's popular, and that's the problem. It is simple. It's kind of othering other people and putting the problems on them. So that's my take on it. That we're getting a whiff of what's happening in the US, and it is nasty.
And
It's like
it's like, sorry, Bernard, it's like a virus, and it takes seconds to come across. I mean,
Really.
I've been watching Shanger, and I can't quite understand why I didn't remember his last name was Jones, but Matua Shane is good too, Bernard. But it is so the speed at which these crazy ideas or these Bernard, what is the issue with those posters that purport to be green posters but are presumably paid for by ACT or whom?
They're paid for by the Sensible Sentencing Trust, is my understanding. Again, it's part of this nether region, grey area between politics and individuals, where money is funneled into the pots of campaigners who then use their often unofficial statuses to support or oppose various groups. And the amounts of money going in are extraordinary, simply because you get a lot of bang for your buck in New Zealand. You know, in America, you have to spend $1 billion to get lunch with the president, but in New Zealand, you know, it's a cup of coffee. It's $1,000 here. It's $1,000 there, and before you know it, you're on someone's speed dial. And so it's cheap. And the other thing that I think is interesting, and I see in the chat some people are talking about Dirty Politics, which I think is one of the most important books covering our political economy written in the last 20 years or so, because it goes into a lot of depth about who the people are, what they've done, and it really lays out the playbook for what they were doing and what we now see in lights with the Taxpayers Union, the various Atlas Network affiliates. And all of this is learned by, and we're not talking large numbers of people, 4 or 5 people who've gone to the United States, learnt the techniques from those super PACs and PACs and the various billionaires who use media, think tanks, junk tanks to get their information across, and it's very effective. And one of the things that I think's changed in the last 15 years or so, and this is something I have a particular view on, is that the advent of smartphones, and in particular the 2012 launch of the iPhone 4, which was the first smartphone to have a front-facing camera, which meant that people could use their phones
as opposed to a nether region floating camera. Is this what you're talking about, Bernard?
These phones became tools for joining and creating tribes online. And because of the power of the data networks that just came of age when the iPhone 4 came along, and the immediate rise of Instagram, and then the quick shift of Facebook and Google into the mobile world through smartphones, we saw essentially the world's conversations, its political techniques and tools and voices go online and become immediately much louder, much faster, much more international.
Bernard, because I can, Bernard, democracy came to the internet and delivered access for ordinary people to have their voices, to join those tribes. Let's remember, what is your Substack? It's a tribe. It's a tribe of Bernard lovers, as it were. So let's just be careful about that, because I'm a slightly different politically from you in some respects. It has created a slightly crueler society, but also there's many of those voices, whether they are supported by the Atlas Network. And there's a brilliant piece this week, which I will send to Simon to put in, or to you to put in the notes, about Ayn Rand. And it suddenly occurred to me, of course, that Atlas Network is presumably from Atlas Shrugged. But,
absolutely.
But Bernard, some of these voices, those people, the Taxpayers Union, we know people in there, Free Speech Union, they would say, even though I might find some of their views repellent, they would say they're actually pushing against the woke mind virus perpetuated by the well-known woke New Zealand Herald and the extra woke stuff. Let alone TVNZ.
I respectfully disagree with your view,
My
there,
assertion.
Peter.
It's an assertion rather than a view.
Assertion.
Right? I'm sitting in an effort.
I would heartily recommend reading Dirty Politics, and also I think that the power and the nature of the debates that we now see through social media are viscerally different than the debates that we used to have as democracies, in the simple way that when you have a debate with someone in the pub or in the town hall, you can see them in front of you. You probably know where they live. They're another human in front of you, and that stops you from being inhuman in your conversation, or at least tones it down a bit.
Yeah, some
I
bugger
know
here,
that.
Bernard. Tristan R has said, "I've finally shown my conservative leanings," which, as you know, is completely wrong. Carry on.
We flushed it out. Yeah,
Boyd, we can. Yeah, hang on.
we,
We're in a. Hey, carry on.
well,
Go ahead.
So that's my view on why that's happened, and I think the fact that Dirty Politics happened in 2012, 13, 14, I think is an important moment, because that's the moment that technology changed the flavor and the nature of how we do democracy, and
we're going to have to adapt to it,
not in a
Bernard,
good way.
by
No, we turn it
providing
off.
kind.
We invite China
thoughtful-
in, and they turn it off.
Yeah, we're gonna have kind, intelligent spaces where Boyd can be happy. You can be happy. Boyd, do you want to comment on that before I do our usual skateboarding dog, which is a doozy this week?
Well, I think the anonymity of social media, and that people talk about keyboard warriors. I think the keyboard cowards, actually. And I think Bernard's right that if you are face to face with someone, or you're putting your name to what you say, that is quite a moderating force.
And that's something that the Kaka is proud of, and we're proud of that. The people who are commenting on our articles have made a commitment to the Kaka. They've paid, and almost all of them use their names and often say very interesting, thoughtful, human things. And I welcome that, and I cheer you on, Boyd. All those years ago, when I was also under attack from Mr. Slater, after he was paid money by a finance company owner to attack me. That's documented. That I sort of saw an insight into the, frankly, sociopathy and the awfulness of it. That means sometimes you have to push back hard, and I welcome your long and hard work doing that. Thank you very much.
Sure, Bernard. Thanks for that.
Thank you so much for coming on, Boyd. I'm sorry we kept you waiting behind poor old Professor Patman, but you're very welcome anytime. I'll talk to you again soon. Bernard,
cheers.
We've had quite a fiery little session going on there, which is inevitable when we talk about
enlightening. Thoughtful.
No, but fiery, but enlightening. Yes, fire enlightens. He said, just doing a really awkward segue. All right, let's do a normal skateboarding dog, and then I think we should talk about doing some sort of public event, but we'll do it later.
Yes.
And I agree. Nicky Hager's a dude. I think it is beneath the Deputy Prime Minister to attend something with Cameron Slater in that way. But I do think we have to recognize and think about the access to information and the access to sharing that people with views that you and I may disagree with feel as though they have now, and that they can be united. But anyway, let me. Well, I think I just said the last thing, didn't I? Until the skateboarding dog. You ready for the skateboarding dog?
Yes, please.
Okay, so it's not from Florida. It's where is he from? So in Nevada, 7 tigers were seized in a SWAT raid at the Nevada home of a Vietnam War veteran who said he kept the animals as emotional support animals.
Only 7.
Yeah, but he's been walking them. The police received warnings. Federal law doesn't say I need a land use permit for my emotional support animals. I have constitutional rights as well as property rights, and I don't need your permits to exist in my world, said Mitchell, who'd been looking after the 7 tigers, which he claimed he'd inherited from that guy, Joe Exotic. It's completely
Joe
bonkers
Exotic. Oh my goodness.
And a classic. Yeah, I didn't even see that thing, but I just my favorite one I think was either the emotional support peacock or the emotional support mini horse, but now we have the emotional support tiger.
Tigers.
7 of them.
And what I love is that you can actually take your emotional support animal onto a plane in America.
Well, no, that's
And
what I
there's-
mean. But but I think taking even United Airlines would balk at taking a tiger onto an emotional support.
Yeah, kitty,
as an
kitty,
emotional-
kitty, kitty.
Right. Goodbye, Bernard.
Yep. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank
Sorry
you very much.
it was a bit feisty in the chat, but thank you.
I never read the comments.
Yeah, well,
Ka kite anō, everyone. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
bye. Thank you.